Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor having you here in this our third pizza, I believe, for the year 2023. The pizza is a product of the Northwest University Business School, where we try to engage the community specifically via experts in different industries to talk openly and honestly about concerns that may be faced with South Africa, in our society, also the broader continent, but more importantly, to find solutions. And from the perspective of what we offer as a business school, to develop ethical leaders, to be part of the technology growth in the world and the country, and of course issues regarding sustainability. Now, this session today will deal with the issue of energy, specifically in the form of the provisioning of electricity. It will be hosted by Professor Piet Croucamp. We have three speakers. Firstly, Mr. Chris Yelland, he's the Managing Director of EE Business Intelligence. Then secondly, Mr Khaya Sithole, we've had him a couple of times here working with us. Welcome, Khaya. He's a chartered accountant and columnist, very active there. I also follow him on social media. And then thirdly, Mr Jan Oberholzer, currently a consultant to Eskom, and as you know, previous Chief Operating Officer. We, as it's fate of habits, we may suffer a bit with electricity. And if we disappear, just bear with us. We will have alternatives in place. But I'm handing you to Piet Croucamp. Thank you, Piet.
Um, just okay. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, it's better now.
Chris, Jan, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I can't hear you at the moment, but I was having a bit of
fantastic.
difficulty earlier.
Okay, good. Okay, it's all good. Chris, Jan, Khaya, I've already, Khaya, if you can switch on your camera, please. I've already said to you guys, I'm not really interested in regurgitating the issues at Eskom, the corruption and whatever has been written about Eskom. I would like us to contemplate something that works. So, Chris, let me start with you. You are appointed as the Minister of Electricity, and you get all the legislative authority to do exactly what you should be doing. What will you do first? How will you plan? What will your blueprint for Eskom look like?
Look, the Minister of Electricity, had the blueprint before he even joined, or before he was even appointed, and that is the President's plan, the National Electricity Crisis Plan announced by the President on the 20th of July. So he has this kind of plan cut out for him, but I'm now going to sweep that off the table and say, well, if I had to start again with my own plan, what would that be? And I would try to keep it much simpler than the existing plan, which covers a lot of ground and it is really a short, medium, and long-term plan. And I would focus on quick wins, and I would try and simplify it significantly. And I would avoid setting up a committee structure with about 10 different work streams, each work stream maybe having 10 people, 10 ministers. For me, this is a recipe for crisis management by committee, which simply doesn't work properly. It doesn't facilitate quick executive decision making and action. It does facilitate talk, and do little. And that's what I see has been happening. I'm not saying they're doing nothing, but I think it's long on talk and short on action. So I would make it much simpler, more executive focused, and I would focus on short-term quick wins. And in that regard, the only quick win that can deliver solutions in the next 12 months to 2 years is solar PV and battery energy storage at domestic, commercial, manufacturing and agricultural level. And I would focus on delivering at least 10,000 megawatts a year and about 3,000 megawatts of battery storage. So about 13,000 megawatts a year. And that can be done, as I say, quickly within a year, and can be done for the second year as well. And to be honest, and if you look at the research done by Meridian Economics, very conclusive research based on empirical evidence, if we had had 6,000 megawatts of solar PV and battery storage last year, we would have eliminated load shedding by something like 95%. That's a quick win, very significant. It would come at no cost to the fiscus other than incentivization. The incentivization costs are not insignificant, but are insignificant compared to the capital cost, which would be borne by the customer, can be delivered quickly. And I think that would, by reducing load shedding by 95% in the first year, that would be a dramatic win, would win the confidence of the public, and would be politically very palatable. So that's what I would do.
Jan, I can point towards the naiveties in Chris Yelland's plan, but I'm not the expert, and everybody will say, well, you don't know what you talk about. Where do you think what is the shortcomings in his argument? What can we do and what can't we do?
There's a couple of things. I believe what Chris has said, there's a lot of merit in it. But for me, I believe we need to have a look at what are we facing currently. So we have a significant challenge where we do not have sufficient capacity. And it is anything between 4,000 and 6,000 megawatts. So that is a fact. Now, what it means is the existing Eskom fleet, the coal fleet, which is unreliable and unpredictable for various reasons. And it's been run in the red all the time. So you have some limping units, and then you run them in the red, all along. And this is why we have all these breakdowns. So the big issue is, in order to get out of this dilemma that we have, there are two issues. Immediate focus. Now, we're not going to get additional capacity within the next, say, 12, 24 months, actually 18 to 24 months. So I believe sufficient capacity. So we are sitting then with a real crisis. How do we deal with the challenge that we have now? And there are two issues. The one being demand side management, and there's very little focus that I see on demand side management, energy efficiency. I don't see our colleagues, the ministers, going on national TV and really make a focus on people to really look at the usage of what is available now. I believe that is critical to deal with. There's no doubt in my mind. So that is the one thing that will assist us, I believe, quite a lot. Will it take us out of load shedding? No, it will not. Then Eskom is busy, to recover some of the big units, and it's about 3,500 megawatts. You can say up to 4,000 megawatts, but that is not going to come back before the end of the year. So we have a real crisis. So we will be able to get additional capacity before the end of the year, but I don't believe it will be sufficient. So I agree with Chris. We have to, and what we need to understand, Piet, and to all that's listening, this is not an Eskom problem. Everybody needs to understand this is a South African challenge that we are sitting with.
Jan, that sounds very much like a politician. Politicians keep on telling us that nonsense. It's not our problem. We've been waiting, we've been warning you, Eskom has been warning government. You cannot blame South Africans for this. It is an Eskom problem.
Piet, let me qualify what I mean by that. If I say it is not an Eskom problem alone, Eskom's got a lot to fix, make no mistake. But why I'm saying it is a South African problem is we all collectively need to work together to fix what we have.
That's something else.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean. I'm not saying, it is not an Eskom problem or it's not a politician problem. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we are sitting in a crisis. We need additional capacity, and we need additional capacity as soon as possible, and we need to reduce the capacity in order for Eskom to take those units offline and fix them properly. If we don't get to that situation that there's sufficient capacity and we reduce the demand, I'm afraid we are going to sit with this risk for some time to come.
Khaya, I want to get to you, but I just want to ask Chris this thing. You shook your head when we talked about the time frames, and something tells me that surely I've heard some suggestions about alternatives that could resolve the issue in the immediate. I'm not talking about car powerships because the president seems to be thinking in that direction, the same as Gwediman does. Why did you shake your head when Jan talked about the time frames?
Well, Jan was sort of indicating that there was nothing really in terms of new generation capacity that can be delivered in the short term. And I would say that's completely wrong. Maybe I misunderstood him. But what can be delivered in the short term is 10,000 megawatts of solar rooftop PV in the domestic, commercial, manufacturing and agricultural sector, coupled with 3,000 megawatts of battery energy storage that would solve 95% of the problem in 1 year. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't focus on longer term issues. In fact, we need to start on the medium and longer term issues now, because if we don't start on those now, they won't be ready in 3 years' time, 4 years' time, 5 years' time. What I see as a problem in my mind is when the Minister of Electricity starts talking about a public procurement process of 15,000 megawatts of utility scale solar PV and wind. This is going to take 3, 4, 5, 6 years to deliver. I'm talking about delivering in the first year solutions that will get rid of 95% of the load shedding. And yes, we must still deal with the medium and long-term issues. So I'm just saying, before you can fix Eskom's fleet of poorly performing coal-fired power stations, you need to have some surplus generation capacity to enable you to shut down generators and do deep level maintenance over a long period of time. It's going to take many years to sort that out, but we need solutions now in the next year, not in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years time.
I don't want you to just repeat long stories about corruption and bad management, all that nonsense. We don't want to hear that. I want to hear something more constructive. You understand this predicament of the diverse sources of authority. You have 3 ministers having to deal with it, at least 3 ministers. Then you have the board, then you have the CEO, etc. What can we do in terms of management to expedite the political process at least?
Good afternoon to everyone. So unfortunately, we do have this problem of an accountability vacuum that has emerged when it seems that there's too many ministries that are supposed to come up with solutions. And I think perhaps it is a historic limitation in that there isn't a single ministry that says, no, actually, we are responsible for the entire comprehensive process. So therefore, we are the one-stop shop for where all these things ought to be. Perhaps that's the one thing that politically we could have done a bit better. Unfortunately, what we seem to be doing is that we seem to be stumbling on the most ridiculous forms of solutions. So if you think of what the Minister of Electricity is supposed to be doing, you would have imagined that that is the one person who would have been told, well, this is the scope of what exists in that particular department. That's the scope of what exists there. We need all of these things to be coordinated centrally so that everybody knows at any point in time who to talk to, what to say, and how to deal with it. And that, unfortunately, has not materialized in the time frame that he has actually been appointed. And I think what we need to be able to find is a way of escalating this sense of crisis mode to government itself to say, well, actually, it is the nature of a crisis that requires you to do things fundamentally differently. And what we've seen now is that there's a whole lot of patchwork where they're simply plastering over the big wounds without actually decisively saying that this is the country's strategy for the next 6 months. These are the hands that are needed on deck, and this is what is being done. What we do know, as Jan will probably attest to, is that we've got all these particular structures that have been put together. So you now have the NECOM, which is the National Energy Crisis Committee, which says that they're trying to put to life the President's Energy Action Plan, which was from last year in July 2022. It was not very clear when the President came back in February to say, no, I'm putting a state of disaster first and foremost, then I'm putting a ministry, where all of those parts were now fitting in. Is the National Energy Crisis Committee doing what it wanted to do? Are they getting us closer? It is difficult to see from the outside because from what you and I see, every single day you wake up and you hope that the worst you're going to see is stage 6 load shedding. So we're not seeing the actual manifestation of all of those efforts. And that's not to say they're not happening, but whatever is being done, for as long as the public doesn't see, they don't have legitimacy, they don't have visibility. So we keep asking what on earth is going on behind the scenes.
Let me just ask you this. This reallocation of authority of ministers, do we need new legislation for that, or can the President arbitrarily assign new authorities to new ministers? Well, how does it work? Khaya?
Is that for Chris or for Matt?
Yes.
Yeah, so one of the key issues that we need to be able to try and figure out is what is it that we're trying to fix? So if you remember, for example, when the state of disaster was pronounced by the president, it then became very clear to everybody who's been following the story that, well, actually, in a state of disaster, you are able to sort of do some of these things in a more agile way. You are able to bypass some of the lengthy processes. So that is the upside of having a state of disaster. But if you actually go and look at the track record of what's happened with Eskom and even Transnet over the past 2 or 3 years, a lot of red tape has actually been dealt with in the matter that we've seen particular directives that say, well, actually, if you need to do this in a matter of urgency, then this is what you need to do. So when the president said there was a state of disaster, it was not very clear what he thought were the remaining bottlenecks that still needed to be resolved. That was the first issue. The second question was that whenever you declare state of disaster, you then need to write the regulations that then say, well, actually, this is what's going to happen differently for as long as the state of disaster is here. And I suspect that when somebody was then given the responsibility to try and write those rules, they realized there were no rules left to be written because everything was already available out there. So the bigger question is, what has Eskom done with all that great additional latitude that they've been given, the latitude that says, well, because you are operating at a crisis mode, you should be able to sort of do something and then report to Treasury. So one of the examples that I always used to cite is that, yeah, usually Treasury will say, well, you need to get permission in order to do this thing. And if you haven't done so, it's definitely irregular, and then you're going to be in trouble later on. So the change has been to say, look, if it has to be done, if it's a business decision, do the business decision and then report to us within a particular time frame. So that's obviously a fundamental shift into what every other organization has been subjected to. So those are the things that have been done. But yet again, the sum of these individual and the sum of these discrete efforts isn't coming through as a single cohesive effort to say we are dealing with the energy crisis, which is why we're still at the crisis.
Is Minister Gwedimantas part of the problem or part of the solution?
I think all ministers these days were probably part of the problem, because unfortunately there is the problem of ideological positions that the ministers have. We all have our own particular ideological positions. What is supposed to be triumphing here, what is supposed to be emerging, is the national interest, firstly, more than my own or your personal persuasions. And what we're seeing here is that in the utterances that we hear from Minister Mantashe in particular, he obviously has very strong ideas about what he thinks can be done. And some of his utterances are quite simply reckless, because you'll remember at some point in time, he alleged that, well, if all we did was move Eskom to him, who could fix load shedding by the end of the year. I think that was the end of last year. Now, obviously, that is ridiculous.
Well, you seem to agree with Chris. You seem to agree with Chris.
If those ideas existed, the question that I asked was to say, well, if there's one minister who knows how to fix this within 6 months or a year, what happens when he gets to a cabinet meeting on a Wednesday? Does he simply say, well, because you haven't given him the portfolio, I'm not going to tell you what the solution is? That is just absolute nonsense. So you could already see that there was some politicking then, there was some ideological persuasion that underpinned the discourse without him actually telling us that this is the country's national solution. So yes, in some instances, the ministers are a problem when they cannot detach from what is their own personal and ideological persuasion to giving us solutions that actually deal with the country's fundamental problem.
Chris, with the exception of Khaya, we are three elderly men here. I don't want to induce a stroke here, but I'll have to ask you this question, because the president has mooted the point. What about car Powerships? Is that part of your short-term solution? And why not? If not, why not?
Look, I first want to answer a previous question you asked, is does the president have the power to reassign authorities to the new Minister of Electricity? And the answer is yes, of course he has the power. There are presidents, he has the power to do this. Trouble with the president is that he is driven by consensus. He needs to find consensus. And instead of demonstrating individual leadership...
Why is that a bad thing? Why is that a bad thing? Why is that
well,
a bad
the point
thing?
is...
Paralysis is the answer, Chris. The pursuit of consensus
so many ministers.
is paralysis.
They're not on the same page. So now they're arguing about who gets what power. There is no consensus at the moment. So what happens? Things stay the same. What is staying the same? It means the Minister of Electricity has no powers, because the other ministers can't agree about what powers to reassign to the new minister. But now, to answer your question, car Powership, is this a quick solution? I see the president has come out finally, I think yesterday, to say that he thinks we should go ahead with car Powership. I think it is a terrible idea for so many reasons. Many reasons. First of all, it's not necessarily a quick solution at all. You know, the quick solution I've given you just now, you know, in 6 months to a year, we can deliver 10,000 megawatts plus 3,000 megawatts of battery storage. That's a quick solution that is environmentally friendly, that does not require legal permissions.
Chris, that's true, but why is Powership not the immediate solution? We know why yours is a solution, but why is that not an immediate solution? They can pull the ships up into the harbor and they start distributing electricity.
I'll tell you why, because they do not have environmental authorization. They do not have ports authorization. This is now 2 years after they were given the order. They do not have ports authorization, environmental authorization, nor do they have a power purchase agreement with Eskom. It cannot happen quickly. People talk about this being a quick solution. No, it's not a quick solution. Not only that, it is the most expensive solution. You've got to understand, this is the most expensive solution with the most carbon dioxide emissions. It's environmentally bad. It's the most expensive, and it cannot be done for environmental and ports authorization and Eskom reasons.
Chris, don't make sweeping statements. Why is it more expensive? Give me the facts and the figures.
Yeah, you just have to work. You remember the bid price. Bid price was approximately R1.50 per kilowatt hour. R1 out of that R1.50 is the fuel cost, gas, LNG, which is imported and is subject to the rand exchange rate and the US dollar price of LNG on the international markets. You know what's happened to the rand yesterday? We're now at 20 rand to the dollar. The price of LNG is getting expensive because of the Ukrainian war and the weakness of the rand. Now, if you recalculate today, what would be the price we would be paying if we to place the contract today? It will be significantly more than 3 rand a kilowatt hour. Okay, so in the meantime, you can get other dispatchable solutions of solar PV and battery storage for which the orders have been placed. Skytech have got, you know, their orders. The only orders under the risk mitigation program that have reached financial close is solar PV and battery storage, and that price is not subject to the rand rate of exchange. It's not subject to the US dollar price of gas. It's not subject to the vagaries of the Russian-Ukrainian war. It's a fixed price in real terms for the next 20 years. That's a good price.
Jan, I'm coming after you. I haven't forgotten about you. I want to know why. I've been to Namibia recently. Most of my friends there, they put solar panels on the roof and they sell the electricity back into the grid. Why don't Eskom allow that immediately? That sounds like, and I think Chris suggests that too, that sounds like a partial solution. Why don't, and let me take it further. In Frankfurt, somebody put up a power station there, solar power station there. You guys stop that. You prevent them from providing the electricity during the load shedding hours, and you don't buy the surplus electricity. That sounds like madness to the average person.
Yeah,
it is madness.
No, I agree with that fully, but we need to bring another party into the discussion here, and that is the NNR. So we as Eskom, we are fully behind what we're talking here. You know, I can recall the days that I was studying MBL. I think it was first year, whatever the case may be, and there was a prof saying, you know, all resources are scarce. And at that point in time, I didn't understand it. Today I understand. If there's an electron that is available, we need to harvest it. Make no mistake. So we as Eskom are fully behind that. Should there be any capacity available in whatever form, we need to be able to harvest it. So this is where the NNR...
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
You say that, but it's not true. You know that. We have the example of Frankfurt. We have the example of Frankfurt. It's not true.
Currently, it is not available. You know, that solution is not available. I agree with it.
Why? Why not?
The national regulator of South Africa need to come to the party, and they need to assist us, you know, in terms of tariffs, etc. So it's not only for Eskom to say we can go and buy from you.
Yeah, but this is madness. I
agree with that.
Of my head. It's madness that you say that there's an entity that one can blame for this, which is such a fundamental factor. How is it possible that Khaya, help Jan out here. Help Jan out.
Yeah.
What do we do here?
Look, I do think that we have to cut him a bit of slack, because remember, there's been the historical practice and the historical limitations on what can and could not be done. And if you remember, it was only in recent times where the impulse was broken. So a few months, I'd say a couple of years ago, business came out and said, look, this idea that NERSA says that I cannot generate my own electricity beyond a particular number of megawatts, it's self-defeating, because clearly, as a country, we have an electricity shortage. So why should I, as a company that has the resources, be prohibited from doing that? Went through an extensive public consultation process where business said, look, at least give us 50 megawatts, then that's something we can talk about. After that public consultation process, we saw a gazette from Minister Mantashe that said that the answer was 10 megawatts. And everyone agreed that that answer was meaningless. It was a waste of everyone's time. And then later on, we then had this very interesting press conference convened by the president and the minister, where the president then came out and said, well, actually, the answer is 100. And actually, in the long run, the answer is that the cap will be lifted. And of course, the question was, well, if everybody knew that there was a national energy crisis, why did it take us so many years and so many iterations and so many back and forth conversations to even deal with just the question of that energy cap? Now, remember, Eskom itself has to comply with whatever the National Energy Regulator says at any point in time. So whether you talk about Eskom's own tariff determination, Eskom is not a law unto itself. Because it's a monopoly, it has to be regulated by other state agencies. And I think historically, we haven't done enough interrogation of, well, historically, when NERSA gave Eskom what everybody acknowledged were not cost-reflective tariffs, where was the shortfall supposed to come from? So unfortunately, because Eskom is the entity that we primarily interact with, they get to answer all the difficult questions. But the regulation aspect of it has not kept up to speed with the issues that South Africa needs to resolve. And unfortunately, even today, it doesn't look like NERSA is as agile or as alert onto the issues that South Africa has as it needs to be. So unfortunately for Eskom, they are at the epicenter of the conversation, but it is not everything is up to them to fix.
I want to ask my friend Tina Nadada a question about import and export and the consequences of all this load shedding. But Jan, let me just come back to you for one thing. This afternoon, 2 o'clock, I think, the Minister of Electricity has a press conference. Let me tell you what he's going to say. He's going to talk about car power ships. He's going to talk about burning diesel. And he might talk about extending the lifespan of existing power stations. All three sounds like horrendous ideas to me, but that is what is left if you can't make decisions, isn't it, Jan? I don't want to put you on the spot because you're still a consultant there, but no, that's madness. It's going to come this afternoon from the Minister of Electricity. It's absolute madness.
I believe all the things that he's talking about has merit. I'm not in the same boat as Chris Yelland, saying he's dead against car power ship. I believe where we find ourselves now, we need to look at it, but not a 20-year contract. You know, why not 3 years? And why don't we fix the gas price? So I believe there is room for that, and that is my view. If you talk about gas, I believe I have consulted the minister, I have given him some feedback. By buying more gas doesn't mean we're going to get more capacity. We need to understand that this is what we can deliver by running Gaurikwa, at Mossel Bay, 24/7, those 5 units. But we have a logistical problem down at Ankerlig in the Cape. Of those 9 units, you can only run it, say, 6 to 7 hours, 24/7. So by buying more diesel is not going to assist us. By making sure there is diesel, that will assure that we have emergencies that is available. By extending the life bit of some of the units, I believe also it has merit. If we can look at a power station X, I'm not going to give names because otherwise I'll be shot down, but let's take a power station and has 6 or whatever the case units. I believe it has merit to go and have a look. Is there a possibility of extending beyond where we say is a shutdown date to extend it for another 5 months, 6 months, a year, whatever the case may be? I believe where we find ourselves as South Africa currently, we need to exploit all the solutions, the possible solutions that we have. So I am in favor to look at car power ships, but not 20 years. If it's 3 years or 5 years, whatever the case may be.
Chris, go ahead. I think you have a desperate urge to say something. I see.
I do. Jan, you say we don't need it for 20 years, maybe for 3 years or 5 years. I agree with that. But to do that will require a new public procurement process. The existing one has taken more than 2 years. So your solution, to reduce the contract period just introduces another delay. And I'm talking about quick solutions, not 2-year, 3-year, 4-year solutions. You're talking about solutions that are going to take years. That's not what we need. We need solutions that can deliver in the next 6 months to 12 months. And your solution of car power is not one of them.
I'm going to ask
Chris,
yes, Jan, go ahead.
Pete,
Yes.
I just want to come back to Chris, because I understand fully where you're coming from. If we follow, the normal process, it's going to take forever and a day. I'm exactly where you are.
The law,
If you-
the law, Jan, not the
But
normal
why do you
process,
make
the
this
law.
suggestion?
No.
Why do you
Give
make
me
the
chance.
suggestion it's not a workable one?
No, give me a chance to finish. Give me a chance. If we take Kusile Power Station, we had a catastrophic failure in one of the flue ducts. So that means if we had to follow the environmental, legislation to the law, we would sit years before we could actually fix it. I was on site at Kusile yesterday, spending the whole day there, and we are just moving. So if we all work together, if we make decisions, we can make a decision, and that's where I am.
Jan, it's not us that have to make the decision. It's the three ministers, the finance minister and the president that has to make the decision, and apparently NERSA. And they don't seem to in agreement. Well, how can you do what you should be doing if they're not in agreement?
But if we all understand where the country is now and what we need to do to fix where we currently are, to get out of this big black hole, we need to make decisions that is not popular. We need to make decisions perhaps that will come and bite us later, but we have to deal with the current load shedding we have in the country. And that means we have to get out of the box that we are used to operating. And I'm exactly where you are. And this is where I see the Minister of Electricity is really focused just on electricity. And I think we need to take our hats off for President Ramaphosa, understanding the critical electricity to the economy and to the people of this country. And I believe that's why he's decided to put our Minister of Electricity there. And I see the Minister of Electricity, one of the biggest roles or critical roles is to pull everyone together at government level, and then to make, sure that we are not bound and fixed and, just in these boxes, so that we look out of it and how do we deal with the challenges? That's my view.
I have a deep affection for you as a person, but that is not a very credible story you're telling. It's not going to fly. It doesn't work. But let me ask Tina Nodada. He's involved in export and import in South Africa. Tina, just tell us the consequences. He's a friend of mine, and he's at Waymakers. He's the director of Waymakers. Tell us the consequences of what we're experiencing in South Africa of load shedding. What are the consequences for the import and export markets of South Africa?
Hi, Pete. Thank you for that question. I would like to excuse myself. I'm not able to turn my camera on, but at least I'm audible, so that will work. So look, as Jan is saying, there has to be some tough decisions that are going to be made. Some that will not be, won't go down very well for all of us. But we need to be very selective of which industries are going to really suffer as we are currently experiencing this load shedding. And if we look at our agriculture industry, the industry that, really kept us through COVID and actually moved us from being a net importer to a net exporter, the consequences are quite serious there. If you look at it, for example, since we had load shedding, if you look at it in 2020, it's averaged that the World Trade Center averaged that it takes about 92 hours to export from South Africa through the ports, where you find that in the more efficient countries, it's about 12.7 hours to do the same. The agriculture industry is set to lose about, in the 9 months to September 2022, lost about 23 billion rands, and this has big consequences, and this affects the entire value chain of the agriculture industry, not just from the farmers, the producers, but also to the storage, to the logistics. So, for example, the irrigation systems that the farmers are using, that has been significantly impacted because of the Ruraflex system, which is now not able to be implemented due to the load shedding hours. So because people have load shedding during those hours that they've been selected for the Ruraflex system, they aren't able to benefit from that. And for people that aren't familiar with the Ruraflex system, it's basically lowered tariffs for farmers during specific hours, which allows them to pay less to irrigate their land. So, you know, irrigation's being compromised, conveyor belts are being compromised, alarm systems, cold storage facilities at farms, but not just at farms, even at ports. You know, the dairy industry is known to almost come to a standstill when you have load shedding because of their increased their dependence on electricity for their machinery and their milking processes. So it really does have a big effect. And you know, I think that if you look at, for example, the fast-moving consumable goods industry, that's also being affected quite heavily. But in closing, what I would like to say from an export perspective and from including the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, so South Africans and Africans are starting to adopt their mindset to this Africa Continental Free Trade Area that was launched, I believe, two years back. And if you're starting to look at our farmers are starting to look for solutions outside of South Africa, getting involved in projects in Zambia, now looking at East Africa, Tanzania, and Kenya. And the effects of load shedding is causing them to question the feasibility of remaining in South Africa because of the high cost of the generators, the diesel to run it. So in essence, you know, people are starting to look at it, and we've got a problem in agriculture where the average age of our farmers is quite high. Where our young farmers, we're not getting a lot coming in, and the load shedding effect, what it has on our crops, on our production, is making it very unattractive. So in closing, Jan, I think we do need to be, I believe, yes, as you say, some tough decisions have to be made in the short to medium term, but we need to be very careful when we're assessing the agriculture industry, because it is one of the backbones of our economy, and right now is being severely compromised. And if that Ruraflex system and new tariff or solutions can be created to incorporate and keep our agriculture industry functioning as it was before, we will see we can survive this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tina spending for agriculture, but why not manufacturing? Why not the car plants, the American investments in car manufacturing in South Africa and assembly? Why not the other industries? Is it possible to select a particular industry that benefit the economy at large more than others to make a selection? Who do we choose? Who will we protect and who will we throw out to the wolves?
No, you're 100% right there, Piet. There's no one industry that is you could say now needs to get, you know, preferential treatment. I think the agriculture industry was one I was using as an example, just to give examples. I couldn't give examples across all sectors, but effectively that's the problem we have as a country. You shut down our ports. Our ports are slow, effective. Storage at the ports, fast moving consumable goods going off whilst being stored. So it's making it unattractive. It's making it unattractive to trade with South Africa because it's not stable. It's unreliable. We have people having their crops going off in transit or prior or during harvest. Yeah. So that's the problem.
You seem to have an idea on that. Is it possible to give preference to specific industries as opposed to others? And should we be doing that?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things that we need to deliberate on is that in times of crisis, one has to make very difficult decisions. And one of the difficult decisions will eventually be the one that says, well, if we only had 1 megawatt to spare, which is the type of industry that you should be allocating it to. So, for example, if Eskom said, look, we need to switch off something during the middle of the day, should we switch off your house or should we switch off a factory? The answer, I may not like it, but the answer is that the factory must have its lights on. So similarly here, the agricultural sector, unfortunately, the country's entire food security hinges on the viability of the agricultural sector. So if we are going to have to apply a particular hierarchy, I strongly suggest that the agriculture industry is going to come on at the top of that hierarchy. Now, of course, I'm not the one that says that there should be a crisis to begin with, but in times of crisis, unfortunately, we're going to have to engage in very difficult conversations about where the country's greatest risks are. And of course, food security to be one such dimension. There could be other industries, but I think in relation to the agricultural industry, it's very clear why it is important for them to be insulated, if possible, from the effects of the load shedding.
Chris, is it possible at all to do what they're suggesting, Khaya suggesting, and Tina suggesting? Is it possible?
You know, to make suggestions that people should cut their load or we should prefer one industry over another, for me, is the wrong approach fundamentally. What we should be doing is delivering new generation capacity to the grid as fast as we possibly can, both short-term solutions, medium-term solutions, and long-term solutions. And these, you know, people talk about we're going to have to make difficult decisions. No. These are not difficult decisions. These are actually easy decisions. There's nothing difficult about incentivizing solar PV and battery storage in the domestic, commercial, manufacturing, and agricultural sectors. In fact, what government should stop doing is what NECOM is doing at the moment. In other words, trying to micromanage the crisis. What government should be doing is putting out economic signals and incentives that customers of electricity can respond to on their own without government interference, financed by customers, solutions by customers for customers, and everybody is a winner. The customer is a winner because they have increased security of supply and better handle on the electricity price going forward. Eskom is a winner because it's not losing any money. It's already losing money because it's not delivering electricity to load shedding. So helping Eskom meet its obligations to the customer is not subtracting anything. And the whole country benefits because the more customers that install rooftop and solar and battery systems, the less load shedding for the whole country. So it's a win-win-win situation, not a difficult decision, doesn't cost a lot, it doesn't take a long time. But for some reason, NECOM is focusing on the longer term issues, the big public procurements that are very problematic, instead of looking at the obvious ones that are staring us in the face.
Jan, these things that Chris suggests, is the infrastructure geared towards that? Can we suddenly, within a week or 2 weeks' time, say, yes, put solar panels on your roof, the business just keep going and you can address the issue? Is it possible to do that? I'm not asking you whether that's the permission or the minister or what. I'm asking you, is it possible? Does the grid have the capacity to actually allow for something like that?
What Chris is requesting is usually where you have the load centers in the country. And that's where we have, sufficient capacity on the grid. So to answer the question, I believe it is possible. I'm not on the same level and table as Chris that we can roll out 10,000 in 1 year. I don't see it. I agree with him. We've got to do it. There's no doubt. But energy alone is not going to solve the problem. And what Chris is talking about is energy, but he brings another point in, and that is battery storage, because we need to store when you don't need it. So Chris is 100% right. I just don't believe in terms of logistically that it's possible, but must it be done? Absolutely. And I believe that in the load centers, what Chris is prophetizing for and asking for, the grid can handle it. If we have big solar farms and wind farms in the areas where the wind shines and where we have sufficient sun and sufficient wind, that's another challenge, because we don't have the grids there. But in the load centers, yes, we do have it.
Chris.
Can I just make the point? Jan says that do we have the capacity to install 10,000 megawatts in a year? And he says he doesn't think so. I think the opposite. Because I've been to Vietnam. I've seen a country with a lower GDP per capita than South Africa, and lower level of development than South Africa, that did exactly what I've said. Through aggressive feed-in tariffs and incentivization and tax incentives, they installed 9,000 megawatts of rooftop solar PV in the domestic, commercial, and agricultural sector in 1 year. The point is, you do not need grid connections. The grid connections in houses, in factories, in buildings, they exist already. You don't need to apply to Eskom for a new grid. It's there already. And farmers have got grid connections already. They got land. They are boermaker plan kind of people with boots on the ground that are perfectly capable of installing and maintaining solar PV systems, which are really simple. So I say we can do it. If Vietnam can do it, believe you me, South Africa can do more.
Jan, you have access to politicians and we don't have. Can you please bloody tell them to just get on with it? We really need, this sounds like a simple solution. And sometimes they say, well, the sun doesn't shine between 7 o'clock and 7 o'clock. But we need electricity between 7 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the morning, that in the afternoon. So if we can address that problem, at least we can, battery power can look after the night. But is it, when you say this to Gary Montash and Sputla and Gordon, when you say to them, we can solve the problem, just open up the system. Do they believe you, or do they have all sorts of excuses why it's not possible, political excuses? For instance, this sounds like privatization to me. It stinks of privatization. That is a hard sell to the ANC. If you say that, is it marketable, the idea? Let's just open it up. Let's put solar on the roof. Let the business start producing their own energy and tap it back into the grid, because it is a solution. You don't doubt it, and Chris agree with you.
Piet, it's a difficult question to answer, and I wouldn't like to try and answer that one. But I believe there's an understanding. There's a real understanding from all three ministers that you've mentioned, Mantashe, Gordhan, as well as our new minister. We call him Sparky in Eskom. So it's Sputla Sparky. I believe there's an understanding, a full understanding. You know, I had an engagement with Minister of Electricity a week or 3 ago, and really he understands the challenge. He understands, Chris, additional capacity is critical now, medium and long term. What I believe is what is lacking in my view, Jan's view, what we call an IRP, Integrated Resource Plan. What we have currently is based on outdated assumptions. This needs to be an agile plan that looks 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. And as we move forward, that needs to be updated. So to answer your question, I believe there's an understanding. Are they on the same page? You know, when I spoke to the Minister of Electricity, he was assuring me that him and the Minister of Public Enterprises, and that's the only minister we spoke about, they are fully aligned and they understand the challenge. So I also believe our Minister of Minerals and Energy, Minister Montashe, understands.
There's one last question, because it bothers me, the whole program. Why do I get the sense that there's a lack of urgency in your explanation of these things? It's as if you understand the problem, but when it comes to the solution, there lacks urgency in the way that you want to execute things. And even the way that you explain, you keep on building in some reason why this is a long-term problem. We are thinking about something now. We love to hear about the long-term story. You keep on telling us about the long-term problem, but there are short-term solutions. Why do I get the sense that maybe you've acclimatized to that culture of explaining it as a long-term problem, and in that way justify why not doing something immediately?
No, Piet, absolutely not. I fully understand we've got a crisis that we need to deal with now. When I started off, I was very clear we need to look at demand side management. And it's something we don't talk about. There we can get a few thousand megawatts immediately. And nobody's talking about that. And I am prophetizing and asking for that, but it seems that this is something that is not taking the attention or receiving the attention. I'm exactly where Chris is. We need to deal with some of the additional where we can get additional capacity now as soon as possible. We need to do it. I'm not saying it has to wait for the future. This is why I'm saying we need to look at car Powerships. It is so much cheaper, although it is so expensive. It is so much cheaper. No, Chris, I didn't interrupt you. I believe it is so much cheaper than the load shedding that the country is going through at this point in time. So we have to look at all the solutions, the possible solutions to deal with the existing crisis while we're looking at the medium and long term. So I'm not at all saying not to look at what we are dealing with now. This is a crisis that we need to deal with.
Jan Oberholzer, I'm a great fan of you. Thank you very much for coming here. I really, really think you do your best. It's a very difficult environment to function. Chris Yelland, first time to meet you. I follow you on Twitter. Lovely. You're a very strong and sane voice. And then also my friend, Khaya Sithole. Thank you very much for coming onto the program, discussing this with us. I'm handing back to my colleague, Albert van Zyl.
From my side, we really appreciate all the experts. Thank you for your time. I think all of us have appreciation of this. This morning I had to explain to my son, he's 8 years old, why he doesn't have access to the internet. That is important to him. At the moment, I'm sitting at the Bank of China, and we're speaking about investment in the country. It's a problem on all levels. I'm appreciative of the fact that we acknowledge that we have to work together and to find solutions. And that is what we as a business school aim to do, to stimulate open and honest, yes, robust discussions. Thank you for that as well, Piet. And we hope to see you again in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, he signed off.
Okay.